that she'd had for her friend, Annabel's brother. If Ben Tarleton had been free to marry for love, then she would have married him, and Arthur had always known there was someone else. However, the expression in Arthur's eyes at this moment told Georgie that she'd hurt him in some way over the years without meaning to. God knows she'd tried to be a good wife, tried to make his life comfortable, but something had always been missing, that magical spark of being in love, and of course he'd known that. "Will you eat some supper if I send a tray up?" she asked. "Perhaps a sandwich and a glass of warm milk with brandy. Don't trouble yourself, Georgie. I'll ring for Mrs. Townsend when I'm ready." "Don't shut me out, Arthur. Not now." She went out and closed the door softly, going down to the sitting room. The tears were very close, but she held them back. It was too late for weeping, too late for anything, really. Dr. Benton's expression had told her that there wasn't much hope for Arthur, and she felt as if the bottom was dropping out of her world. She'd built her world around him, enjoying their quiet life together, his little jokes and the comfortable togetherness they'd shared. But now she was beginning to understand it wasn't enough for either of them. Because Arthur had never demanded more, she'd assumed he was content, but suddenly he was no longer bothering to hide his feelings, and Georgie felt sad that she'd let him down. She went into the sitting room, picking up a newspaper and trying to concentrate, but the news was so depressing with all the trouble in Europe, and her eyes pricked as she fought against her tears. Arthur seemed to have turned against her, almost as though he was blaming her because his illness had caught up with him too soon. The church clock was chiming the hour as Georgie heard the stairs creaking and went out into the hall to greet her guest. Everything creaked in this old but much-loved house, and it was impossible for anyone to come down without announcing their arrival. She turned to look at the young woman. Beth was Annabel's protégée, an adopted daughter, because she'd taken her in after Beth's mother was murdered by Annabel's first husband. Annabel's marriage to Richard Hanson had been desperately unhappy, and Beth's mother had blackmailed him, but he'd had her murdered, though it was a secret that Beth did not share. She knew that her mother had been killed, but Annabel would never tell her anything more. "What a charming dress," Georgie said as the young woman reached the bottom. "Where did you find that, Beth?" The hall smelled faintly of flowers, some of it from a bowl of potpourri on the well-polished oak hutch placed against the wall just outside Georgie's front parlour, the rest from a large vase of sweet peas that she had picked from her garden earlier. "Hetty sent it for me from Paris," Beth Rawlings replied and crossed the hall to kiss her cheek, not from habit or duty, but affection. She was rather worried about her friend at the moment because she knew Georgie was struggling to keep her spirits up in the face of her husband's latest illness. "Isn't it lovely?" She did a little twirl to show off the movement of the beautifully cut dress as it clung lovingly to her slender figure, flaring out at the hem. "Hetty sometimes designs things for that fashion house, as you know, and Madame Arnoux lets her buy things for next to nothing. This dress was left over from last season, but that doesn't bother me in the least." Outside they could hear the drone of a light aircraft from the airfield some 2 miles distant. It seemed to circle overhead for a few minutes, and then the noise faded away. Both were aware of a slight tension in the other, but neither referred to the noise, which was becoming more frequent of late. It seemed to bring home the threat of the war everyone said was inevitable. "I should just think not," Georgie said of the dress. "I would love to be able to buy something like that myself. It would make such a change from her habitual tweed skirts and twin sets, which fitted her way of life." "If you tell Annabel, she might be able to fix it up for you. She visited her sister last year, as you know, because she thought Hetty might want to come home, now that she has left Henri, but of course she wouldn't. Annabel isn't thinking of going out again herself at the moment, not as things are, but Hetty said in her last letter that she might come home for a visit with us." At the age of 17, Hetty Tarleton had run away to Paris to live with Henri Clermont, who was a successful artist, but a rather selfish man some years her senior. Pleas from both her brother Ben and her sister Annabel had met